So much for joining us today. Really excited about the topic that we're going to be discussing, as well as the individuals who are here today to discuss that topic. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Lisa Guadagno, and I am an executive consultant supporting Horizon X. Steve Suarez. Hey, Steve.
Morning,
Steve is
Lisa.
the founder and CEO of Horizon X Consulting, an innovation consulting company. And previously, Steve served as a global head of innovation for global functions at HSBC. We also have Jeremy Utley.
Good morning.
Jeremy led executive programs at Stanford's D School for 12 years. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford's School of Engineering, and he recently finished a book called Idea Flow. You've got to check it out. During this discussion, we want to hear from all of you. So please share any comments, questions during the event. And during the last 15 or so minutes, we will answer any questions that we didn't get to during this event. So with that, why don't we get started? I'm going to start with you, Jeremy. I'm going to start very basic. And that is, what is design thinking?
Very basic. It's great. Design thinking is, very simply put, it's a language and approach and a set of tools to facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration for the purpose of generating disruptive innovation. So those are kind of three key components there. But language and approach is one thing. Interdisciplinary is another thing. And then disruptive innovation is the third thing.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
I would say though, one way to think about it very simply is it's a how, not a what.
And do you feel as if you can solve problems leveraging a design thinking approach?
Absolutely. I think that's the purpose, is to solve pressing problems. Increasingly in the world today, the problems that are facing our organizations don't fit neatly within any disciplinary bucket, right? So rarely is it just purely an engineering problem or purely a policy problem or business model problem. Most of the challenges facing us are interdisciplinary in nature, and yet very few of us have been trained in approaches that seek to amplify the respective contributions of the various domain experts that get brought to the table. Most of the time, if we have an interdisciplinary approach, we default to, if there's an engineering question, well, what does the engineer say? If there's a policy question, what does the attorney say? And that's what that does, is it diminishes the respective perspectives of the rest of the folks in the group. And what design thinking really seeks to do is find a way to give everyone a voice and give everyone a role to play and some language for how to play those roles when solving really complicated, messy problems.
Great. Thank you for that, Jeremy.
Hey,
Steve, I'm going to...
Lisa, if I can add on to what Jeremy said, I think it's important that you have the training. I think there's a lot of people that talk about design thinking. And for me, it was very eye-opening when I went and I actually studied under Jeremy. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Jeremy was my professor, which is kind of how...
You called me Mr. Miyagi, Steve.
He had me wax on and wax off. I learned a lot under Jeremy, which was, very few times in courses do I sit there and think, wow, this is incredibly impactful. And I don't know why it took me so long in my career to actually find something that I could actually bring to different organizations and have an impact. And I think it was so meaningful to me. But the funny thing about design thinking is it seems common sense. People tell you these things, and of course you got to put the customer at the center of everything, and you have to drive everything. But when you actually go through the exercise and actually do it the right way, I just saw a lot of great benefits coming out of it. And the funny thing is, I'm a pretty outgoing guy, And Jeremy has a really good way of getting people to get out there, interview, like, and it actually made me get out of my comfort zone, because I remember one of the events, Jeremy, I don't know if you remember this, but you had people go out to hotels and interview.
Oh yeah. Oh
for
yeah.
for-
We get all of a sudden we get a lot of people calling in sick saying their dog ate their homework whenever they realize they actually have to leave the office. It's very strange.
and the funny thing is, everybody talks about design thinking, but when you're in the core of doing it, it is a different feeling. And I remember going to hotels and trying to approach people, and like people look at me like, why are you approaching me in this hotel, and asking them questions. But once you got engaged and you started asking questions and you started kind of observing people, and not only hearing what they said, but seeing how they acted and using these methodologies, you started getting patterns, and you started seeing value, and you started seeing things in a different way, which is why I think that it's got to be done right. It can't be done piecemeal or this other stuff. But I think design thinking has such a powerful approach if done right. And you can make a lot of people happy. You can make your customers happy. You can make your investors happy. You can make your employees happy. It's, in my mind, it's something that uses to make a lot of people happy.
So, Steve, on just kind of thinking through that, can you share an example of when you actually use design thinking in the workplace and to solve problems, and the impact that that had?
Yeah, I mean, I've used it on different examples, and I'm sure Jeremy can kind of, share some. I think I've used it on samples like somebody wanted to make sure they were patching more on cybersecurity. And they come to me and it's like, Steve, I need you to build me a database. So they come to me with the solution. And then, I kind of back them up and I'm like, all right, tell me what it is that you're really trying to achieve. And I work with people to say, all right, what you need isn't a database. It just seems like everybody wants a database these days. And how do I understand what is it that they're at the core trying to resolve, and then help them out. And it's great because when that light bulb moment goes off, it's actually very impactful. I've seen it with lawyers where lawyers have used it to shorten their terms and conditions by almost 80%. And increase effectiveness. I mean, nobody likes to read T's and C's, but if you can make it more engaging, more understandable, then it's something that actually helps your customer and helps you make sure that you can deliver what you're trying to achieve. I've seen it, people increase sales by 35%, and being able to understand what it is that their customer is trying to solve and how do they solve it. And even in my personal life, I use it with my kids. And so it's not something that you only have to use professionally, and working in my personal life. So part of it, Lisa, is, when driving innovation, um, the methodology is very experimental, and part of doing innovation is about experimenting, and looking for things, and making the whole experience great. And it's not only about making the design look good, and it is about making sure that you're delivering on that need. I'll give you one example where actually where I feel like if they use design thinking, they can get me. I actually just subscribed to a subscription of, I won't name the company, but they got the top people in the world giving classes about how they made it and how they were able to achieve their success. And the content is phenomenal. It's fantastic. It's very inspiring. But the application on my phone is horrific and it's hard for me to use. And it's really disappointing because what I really want to do is gain the knowledge that these people are providing, but the application fails to be able. I can't download things. I can't see it. I can't like follow from one thing to the next. And so while I think these guys have a gold mine as far as a product, the user experience, or what I am experiencing as a final user, is not going well. And I could tell you that as of right now, unless they fix that, I won't be subscribing any further, and they're going to lose me as a user and as somebody that could actually be selling on their behalf as a promoter.
Thanks, Steve, for that example. Jeremy, I'm wondering if you could also share an example that you might have.
Time would we could do the whole session of just examples. One thing that I'll mention, Steve said someone came to him with a need for a database, and I think actually that's a really great use case. And many times what I see is, we talk a lot about solving problems. And Lisa, that was your question: is does it help you solve problems? I think that's part of it. Fundamentally, though, it's really even first, it's about finding problems worth solving. And a lot of us get so focused on problem solving. There's a comment here in the chat. What does design thinking do that common sense can't? I would say nothing. It restores common sense. And I would say common sense rarely prevails in organizations. We get tunnel vision exceptionally quickly, whether it's the person saying they need a database, right? Well, if common sense would prevail, they probably would be asking the question differently, but they don't. It doesn't, and they don't, right? Another example of this: recently, I was working with a Fortune 50 food company, and one of the folks in the group was saying, "We've got to add variety. We've got to add variety," and we're having this whole problem-solving exercise around how do they add variety in their product assortment. And I asked a really simple question. I said, "What is variety going to do for us?" And the gentleman who had been posing the question he said something very interesting. He said, it would help people make healthy options or make healthy decisions. And I just said, oh, the problem we're trying to solve, I thought we were trying to solve the variety problem. We're trying to solve the help people make healthy decisions problem. So variety is one way to do that. And then I just asked the room, there's 50 people in the room. Are there other ways to solve the healthy decision problem besides variety? And all of a sudden, the room just lit up with possibilities. That's a case, I would say, if you think about design thinking as a strict formula and sequence of steps, that's not a design thinking example, because we don't empathize and then define and then ideate, right? That's why I said design thinking is a how, not a what. It's a way of thinking about not only solving problems, but also finding the right problem to solve. And that's a moment of design thinking where we just got clearer on the problem we're trying to solve, and all of a sudden the solution space opened up dramatically. And it's very similar to Steve's example. But I think I really appreciate that comment in the chat. And I would just say, very often common sense does not prevail. And one of the greatest gifts I think design thinking has given the world is a restoration of common sense and a little bit of a structure and some language to help teams restore their common sense once they get in that all too common tunnel vision moment.
And if I could add to that, Jeremy, it's funny because I think it seems like common sense, but when you're doing it, and I'll go back to that hotel example, or even with my kids, when I tell them, look, this is how you use design thinking, what they're often go back to is they want to validate their idea. And so instead of asking somebody a question and keeping it open-ended, they're already kind of leading the witness. They're already saying, hey, isn't my product fantastic? And why is my product so great? And so I see people say, oh, we're using design thinking, but what they're really doing is they're really just trying to validate their own decisions. And there is a technique about putting the question out there, keeping it open-ended, observation. And I think all of that is such a powerful part of it that people say they do it, but when I see it in practice, they're really not. Everybody's just trying to validate why their idea is the best idea.
So I think those examples are great ones. And what I'd like to do is just kind of bring it over to organizations. As organizations look to implement design thinking, creating an innovative culture, what are some of the challenges that they may face in doing that? And how do we overcome those challenges?
Well, Steve's obviously a world expert in bringing things to organizations. I don't know, Steve, if you'd like to go first. I'm happy. I have an entire book dedicated to the misadventures of myself and my colleague Perry, and trying to. We've attempted to build capacity in organizations all over the world. But I would highlight Steve as a star of idea flow. So Steve, maybe you want to share, and then I can bring
Yeah,
back the
yeah. No, I mean, listen, I think part of some of the problems that I deal with is kind of that comment that people think design thinking, oh, it's common sense, or I'm doing it without really practicing. Actually, I had someone, I won't name the person to kind of protect the guilty, that said, oh, stop doing design thinking and start doing. And they didn't, that's when I realized, wow, this person really doesn't understand the concept between design thinking is about iterative, rapid prototyping. It's about action. And that's the thing I like about design thinking. I think one of the other, and the funny thing is all of this was very memorable. One of the things I remember in Jeremy's class, he was like, all right, in the next 5 minutes, you got to build a tea caddy with anything you see around you. And it was like, all right, I gotta act, I gotta do, and it gets you.
We actually had a timer going, right? So it's like you didn't have time for excuses. Yeah, that's a trick.
You had to get it done. And I don't know, maybe some of you might know me as a competitive person. I had to build the best tea caddy in the world in 5 minutes. But it's good. I think that's kind of, I think what I want is for people to understand what is the design thinking, but truly kind of follow design thinking. I don't want it to fall in that same bucket where agile felt in, is everybody knows the words and the terminology, but they're not really practicing the purpose behind agile, and the same thing for design thinking. So for me, it's really important that we create that awareness, we create that understanding. And I think Jeremy had helped me do that at a bank, where we were able to give that training to over 12,000 people to understand the concepts. People started picking up the terminology. People started working together. And I could tell the difference between the people who took that course and the people who didn't take that course. But when you're having that much impact at scale is where you start seeing the really cool stuff happen. And I remember people would come up to me and said, hey, this is like one of the best courses I've ever taken. I used it to create this or create that. And that's where you separate education from being an expense to being something where you're actually able to have an impact at scale. And I was lucky enough that I had a wide audience. I believed in what I was delivering, and we were able to share that. And I saw firsthand the value of a very good, disciplined design thinking program in place, which is why when I left my previous organization, the first person I called to partner up with was Jeremy, because I know he's the leading person in this, and to see how do we do that in multiple organizations and how do we offer our services. And I'm lucky enough that Jeremy has said, yes, let's work together. And so part of what I do is go to big organizations that want to drive innovation at scale and use these techniques to show proven results. So if anybody on this call is interested,
I have a rule in life that anytime a star reaches out, you say yes. I didn't even read your email, to be honest with you, Steve. I just said yes first, because I respect what you've done, and I've seen the impact that you've been able to unlock. The only thing, Lisa, if I may, I would just kind of double click. Your question was around organizations. There's a word that Steve used a few times that I think bears repeating, which is practice. And I think it's something that it's hard to appreciate the extent to which innovation's a practice. It's an ability, and if you said, for example, Lisa, what are the challenges that organizations face when implementing piano playing in their organizations? I'd say, well, the challenge is everybody has heard Mozart before, and very few people spend any time on the keys themselves. And so we're familiar with innovation everywhere, and we can see it and we can taste it and we can feel it and we acknowledge it and we read articles about it. None of that is hands-on keys. And the moment we put hands-on keys, we realize my hand doesn't reach that far. And I go, Nest thermostat. Your hand does not reach to Nest thermostat without a lot of practice. Tony Fadell, prior to launching the Nest, had practice at Apple, where he built the iPod. Prior to that, he had practice at General Magic, where he built, right? There's this incredible, I think, underappreciation of the capability aspect of this. And by capability, I just mean human ability. And humans reading books, reading articles, watching videos aren't more capable of innovation than humans listening to Mozart are capable of playing the piano. And that's really where the design thinking approach falters in organizations. Is organizations say, we've been playing Mozart on the loudspeaker. We're playing it in the elevator, and then we get up to the piano floor and nobody can play the piano. I go, well, who's doing their scales? Do we have any gifted teachers actually helping them improve? Are they doing the Suzuki method? You can take the analogy as far as you want, but the point is, the organizations falter when they don't see that there are human beings who have to develop an ability in order to deliver results. That's why at Stanford, we say it's innovations are the output. We focus on, that's a different thing. We're not focused on innovation. We're focused on innovators. And our big shift, if you think about, where in the world is kind of head of innovation or leading innovation? Silicon Valley. Where in Silicon Valley? Stanford University is an incredible hotbed of innovation. What's Stanford's innovation hub? It's the D School. So at the center of the center of the center, we say it's not about innovation. People show up at class, they go, what do you mean it's not about innovation? We say it's about innovators. And our outcome is people equipped with an ability. And the mistake many organizations make is they try to grab a hold of innovation as if that's the outcome. And what they fail to do is equip individuals and teams with abilities that then result in innovation.
So how would you help organizations kind of transition to that thinking? What are some of the ideas or things that you put in place to kind of challenge their thinking?
I could tell you from our perspective is back to Jeremy's point, is building that confidence. And nothing builds more confidence than just jumping in and experimenting and doing this. So you have to give people the room to be able to experiment. You have to give that upskilling and that education. I'm a big believer in mindset, right? You have to have the right mindset to drive it. And so it's really kind of building that environment where people can bring their whole self to work. People have a psychologically safe environment to go. They have places where they can do those experiments. And they have the training to say, all right, how do I get people like Jeremy to come in my organization and help lead this and see how it's done successfully? I think there's no secret. And you guys that know me, know my background. I always go to the best of the best to learn from. And so when I wanted to learn about innovation and I wanted to learn about how, Airbnb, Netflix, all these companies are actually using it to grow, it was at the D School. And so, that's why I registered at the D School. I couldn't agree more with Jeremy. Is I like learning from the best. I'm learning about quantum computing, and I've gone to MIT to kind of work with that faculty and understand there. And
do not ask me about quantum computing, Steve.
Don't worry about it. That was what I was doing last week. So this week is more on design thinking and innovation. And so part of it is, and part of my passion is how do I help get that light bulb moment for companies, for employees turned on, and how do I use these techniques to help do that? And those are the services that I'm looking to offer large corporations that really want to deliver value at scale using these. And it's not like I'm selling something I don't believe in. I'm right in there with them and helping them deliver, and having Jeremy by my side just gives me even much more confidence of the ability to be able to offer these services.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm wondering, we do have a comment, and I just wanted to call this out. Comment around it's truly culture and mindset adoption. And I thought that was a great comment to share. Jeremy, I was wondering if you could maybe share an example of where this really worked, what you've seen work. Maybe you can share your perspective and what you've seen be successful.
Yeah, my pleasure. I would say one of the leaders who I admire most is a man named Mark Hoplamazian. Mark is the CEO of Hyatt Hotels, probably the site of some of Steve's nightmares from his course. But we actually partnered with Hyatt to record some of that course because we had been working with them. But Mark is a visionary leader, and he has really developed Hyatt's sense of purpose in the last, now almost 15 years, I believe, as him being CEO. And Mark brought us in with his CMO, Sarah Carney, came to the D School. She came to a program that we were teaching called Customer Focused Innovation. And she said, what do we have to do to bring this back? And we said, well, it's going to be a large scale transformation effort. And we can do a class. If you think the answer is a class, then we show up, on a couple of days and we do a class. But we said, that's not going to deliver the transformation I think that you're aiming for. And Sarah and Mark, to their credit, said, well, what would it take to accomplish a transformation? And we laid out a very ambitious and very broad scale, longitudinal, meaning over the course of time, transformation initiative where we worked with Mark and the senior leadership team, the chairman of the board, the chief finance officer, legal officer, real estate officer, the very senior most folks in the organization. We set some expectations with them. They set a broad ambition to equip the organization. At that time, there were about 600 properties. Now there's over 1,000. But there were about 600 properties, and they wanted to take a small subset of those, I think something like 12. And they actually wanted to equip them as laboratory environments, and where experimentation, so where that Steve used earlier, experimentation could occur. And so we in our team, we went on a roadshow, and we facilitated short burst experiences with critical leaders across the organization, food and beverage leaders, hospitality leaders, room service leaders, all over the organization. But then we went deep with those 12 properties that were going to be laboratory properties. And we trained folks from the general manager. Some of these general managers they're running a $50 million business, right? And they've got to be trained in the tools. And then the frontline workers, folks who are checking folks in at the front desk, and room service staff and restaurant staff. We're training folks all across the stack. And then what we did is, after we kind of built the capability in these lab hotels, then we structured a process whereby they undertook in parallel a series of innovation, you call them tournaments almost, where they developed new to the world products and services in isolation, in a pilot kind of environment. And then we rolled them up to Mark and his team. And we had a series of senior leadership team meetings where they actually did design reviews of the work that was being deployed in these radically different contexts, from Mumbai to Sao Paulo to New York to Santa Clara. And what we did was the projects that emerged as some of the leading projects, they got scaled first to the other laboratory hotels to see, is this just a cultural thing or are there opportunities here? And then once they got traction in the laboratory environments, then they started scaling across the brand and across various of their properties. But we're all the way, not just working with innovation, we're working with Mark and his team. I have a wonderful friendship and relationship with Mark to this day. Now that was 2012, over 10 years ago, and we still speak regularly and interact regularly. And I'm just cheering him as he's doing an incredible, continuing that transformation at Hyatt. But if you look at what we did, it wasn't just ran a workshop for somebody. No, it's a relationship, and it's being thoughtful about the capability that we're developing, and then the mechanisms for interaction, not only between innovators and the leaders, but across innovators. And how are we sharing information? And what kinds of mechanisms need to be developed in order to enable and unleash the innovations that are happening at the front lines and share those stories, right? So there's a lot of moving parts there, but to me, it's a great example of a leader with a visionary ambition to transform the organization, and then the commitment to undertake the work to create the capacity, and then create the mechanisms and structures to ensure that that capacity is realized and amplified.
Great, Jeremy. Thanks so much for that example. I think that really helps out a lot for folks to really understand how to progress design thinking and have it work for them. So I appreciate that. We do have a few questions, but before we go there, I was wondering if there were any other examples that either Steve, you have that you want to share with this group, or Jeremy, you have that you want to share. And then after that, we can move on to the questions that we're getting from those that are attending today.
Jeremy, I mean, I think you've got a lot more. I've got very specific ones where in my last organization, and my company now is only 60 days old, so I can't claim that I have all these great successes yet. I do have a Japanese customer now that we're talking about design thinking and doing some things. I've got a lot of high hopes. Lisa, I hope that next time we meet, I'll come back with a whole bunch of very specific ones. A lot of it is in my previous organization, which I already mentioned, increasing sales and having an impact on the strategy and lowering the terms and conditions. I mean, those are just some examples, but I've seen such a great impact. But I think maybe, Jeremy, you have more from that angle, and then maybe I can talk about some of kind of what breeds it, like the ideas, the amount of ideas, and all of that stuff. So I'll hand it over to Jeremy.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to make a shameless plug of my own work, but the book is filled with stories of both successes and failures. So if folks really want to dive in, and not that you have to buy a book, I mean, a lot of the chapters have been excerpted. For example, there's a great story about some of the work that we did with Fairchild Semiconductor, which is excerpted by Fast Company. So if you search Fast Company, you'll find, with my name, you'll find a story about that. There's a great piece actually of a failure at Silicon Valley Bank that was excerpted by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. So you could dig in there and you could find that story. There's lots of these stories are now out in print. One of the examples that I really like, which is kind of unexpected, but there's a bank in New Zealand and Australia called Westpac, and we worked with Davi Olivier, who's a South African-born innovator, expat living there in New Zealand. He was a CTO at the time, and he wanted to accomplish a transformation. We went in and did a major initiative with him, multiple kind of engagements and coaching over a period of several months, where we're working with his teams. And one of the things I love that they did, they realized they've got branches all over the world, or certainly in all over Australia and New Zealand especially. And they realized that the lines of communication were somewhat muddied between the branches and the headquarters. And one day we just said, well, why don't we just go to a branch? And they go, well, you can't just go to a branch. And we said, well, yes, we can. And we actually just walked down the street. I mean, there's literally a branch, within walking distance. And, for them, this is a violation of protocols. And we're going into a branch. So we go into a branch. We start talking with, I think her name was Rachel Compton. She's the branch manager, amazingly frustrated branch manager, because she had been sending feedback, very thoughtful feedback. This, by the way, is just one branch that we walked to. It's not like we prearranged this or preordained it. We just walk in and start asking her about her relationship with headquarters. And she starts telling us about the frustrations that this doesn't work and this doesn't work. And I'm telling people, well, we come back and we say, well, let's map the communications, and basically what we learn is it goes from Rachel and it does this big horseshoe. It's something like 12 steps to get to the person who can actually change it. And then we said, well, okay, well, and we kind of, we were there for a week and then we left. Well, then the team takes the ball and they run with it. And it was interesting to see, they said, okay, why don't we take Rachel and let's bring her to the team? And that didn't really work. And then they thought, well, why don't we take the team and let's embed them in the branch? And that didn't really work. And so they had this kind of iterative approach, but they ended up, ultimately, they made a couple of major changes to their internal communication structures. And they actually brought Rachel in to push them live and had Rachel post on their Yammer, I think they had a company Yammer, a selfie of herself actually pushing the code live that she had been involved with helping rewrite. And it was just this amazing moment of showing we can break down, communication channels, we can break down silos, but getting back to the comment earlier about common sense, it's a great example of how corporate policy often overrides common sense. And sometimes what you need is just permission to even break rules. The rules exist for a set of reasons, and sometimes they impede progress. And having the perspective of, well, what if we did just walk into a branch? What if we did just call a branch manager? It's amazing how subtle, how simple some of the subtle shifts are, but how profound they can be in terms of providing fresh inspiration to the team, not just inspiration in terms of the ideas that they didn't know about, but also their purpose, their reason. I mean, I remember one of the general managers at Hyatt, one thing she said in the middle of that work is, this project has reminded me of why I fell in love with hospitality in the first place. That's not, hospitality is a special industry for sure, but it's not to say that hospitality is special. It's to say that your people joined your organization for a reason. They felt a sense of possibility and wonder. And it's likely, if you just ask, what percentage of the initial possibility that you felt when you joined the organization do you feel now? I'm almost certain in almost every case, the number is less than 100. There are some organizations where the number is actually more than 100, and I think they're very special. It's not to say that it's impossible. I think most people are somewhat stifled. Most people's imaginations have been somewhat thwarted. And what bringing a practice and a process like design thinking does is it reinvigorates your people, and it reignites the imaginations and the sense of possibility.
Thank you, Jeremy. Steve, anything else to add before we move to some Q&A?
No, let's go ahead and jump in. I'm ready to kind of get into Q&A and see what we can offer people, how we can help people out, and keep sharing some interesting stories.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Steve. This is a question directed at you. How do you keep innovation true to ROI, off-course short-term returns, while discussing it with CFOs and CTOs?
Yeah. So I've got a professor at Harvard that I studied under, and he talks about being ambidextrous. And I know, Jeremy, you talk about it as well. And it's both the exploit side and the explore side. And the exploit side is what a lot of organizations do, which is inwardly focus. How do we make things incrementally better? And that's it's got a lot of people's attention, and that's where people's focuses are. But what I think when you're driving innovation is that's at the expense of the future. So you have to have a good balance between your exploit and your explore. And so the incremental innovation, today's innovation, what a lot of people call transformation, is incredibly important. But you shouldn't forget your Horizon 2 and your Horizon 3 innovations as well, and really making those bets so that you can both work looking internally on how do you make yourself better, but most innovations are going to come externally. And so how do you keep an eye to the external on bringing in new technologies, bringing in new processes to your organization to really move the needle, and then to make these big, bold big, bold bets on, hey, let's bring in things new to world. And I think Jeremy talked about the stuff that is new to world. Jeremy, did you want to add to that?
No. I appreciate a good answer.
And you heard me about talking about Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3. There's no secret why my company is called Horizon X. I work in all three horizons.
All right, I'm going to move to a different question. And I think we covered some of this, but let me ask this question. What are the common blockers, areas of resistance, and points of failures you see as organizations start to make these changes and implement these concepts? So we talked about this a little bit, but I think we want to get a bit more specific. So I don't know who wants to start. Jeremy, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd be happy. I'd be happy to begin. I think one is this is a huge question. Again, we could have an entire session devoted to this. But there are kind of individual blockers. There's team blockers. There's departmental and there's organizational. So there's kind of blockers throughout. In terms of, at the individual level, you may not realize it. Very few, you hear a lot of people say, I'm an ideas guy. Cognitively speaking, you're not. You're an idea guy. And there's a big difference because the difference is we love a new idea, when it's good, but we don't like the ambiguity and uncertainty of multiple ideas or multiple possibilities. And innovation is in part a numbers game. It requires an enormous volume of possibilities to actually arrive at the right one. So, and very few people can kind of tolerate that ambiguity without practice, right? That's part of the practice, is growing comfortable with that ambiguity. So on an individual basis, there's kind of the question of being willing to tolerate generating lots of ideas, lots of stuff not working, et cetera. And at the team level, I was actually talking on my podcast yesterday with the great Amy Edmondson, who's just written a new book, and her work in psychological safety. She wrote a book a few years ago called The Fearless Organization, where she talks about the importance of psychological safety. And really specifically, she introduced into the conversation this idea of team psychological safety. And at a team level, there's a question of, what is the appetite or what ability do people have to say something without fear of retribution, without fear of being judged or dismissed or punished, or, there's all sorts of dynamics there. And as much as the internal kind of cognitive biases around wanting to get the right answer, which is called the Einstein bias, or satisficing, there are also team elements around psychological safety. And there's a number of reasons that happens. And then, of course, you've got organizational levels. There's organizational resistance. And that really comes down to, as Tushman at Harvard, I assume that's Steve's professor there, and O'Reilly, his partner at Stanford, they've written eloquently on the topic. But if there's not a strategic intent, as they say, which justifies exploration as a meaningful part of your business objectives and ambition and direction, then no matter how much individual and team safety there is, an appetite to take risks, if there's no strategic intent and active support by leaders in the organization, then individuals will end up kind of leaving, and then they'll start. That's why people leave and start businesses, because actually they learn the organization doesn't want to innovate, or it doesn't want to innovate in the way that maybe they see as the big opportunity. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass to Steve. There's also a question of complementary capability. Design thinking isn't everything. And I want to be very clear with people when we talk about design thinking, I wouldn't make design thinking synonymous with innovation even. It is a methodology for generating a volume of ideas quickly. What Tushman and O'Reilly talk there's a lot of research. That's a core capability. Kind of idea generation is a core capability, but then there's a complementary capability around what they refer to as incubation, which is different than idea generation. How do you incubate? And then there's another capability around scaling, right? So they call them the kind of three capabilities of exploratory thinking. So design thinking, our whole conversation has really been focused on this question of, how do you generate new possibilities? How do you sense and seize opportunities? Well, then incubation is the next capability. That's there. We have an entirely other class at Stanford that deals with that subject. And we've worked with organizations every bit as much to develop an incubation capability as we have to develop a design thinking capability. But getting back to the question of where are points of failure, an organization may develop a design thinking capability and they start generating lots of ideas, and without appreciation for the fact that unless there are mechanisms and systems in place to then incubate some of the ideas that come out of an idea generation practice, then you get great ideas, but you're not able to actually seize the opportunities because you don't have structures in place to start to assess viability and start to almost be more entrepreneurial in your execution of those opportunities. I'll pause there, but to me, sorry, I kind of wanted to lay out, there's individual, there's team, there's organizational, and then there's capabilities beyond design thinking. All of those are potential failure points on the road to innovation. I think that's really what the question was about.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to that, and by the way, Jeremy, thanks for reminding me. I didn't mention Mike Tushman on there. He's exactly the person. And Mike, if you're listening in, I apologize. Obviously, I learned a lot in your course. I think the other part is setting the right expectations, because people think, oh, I'm going to implement the design thinking and I'll get my ROI right away. And design thinking is really about stopping and truly understanding the problem first before just jumping in and starting develop and doing a project. And so a lot of people like, look, I already know what my customer wants. I already know what we need to build. Let's just go ahead and start building. I need you to start coding. And the reality is that design thinking in the long term, while other people see it as more expensive because you're spending all this time up front, is actually cheaper because you get closer to what you're trying to achieve, which is making your customer happy and satisfying that. And if you spend the time doing that in the beginning, you're going to spend less money, less work doing rework, trying to get back to what your customer really wants. And so while you might seem like you're spending less money by not using it, you're actually spending a lot more. I like using quotes, and one that Einstein would say is that if you gave me an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 55 minutes understanding the problem and then the last 5 minutes on the solution of that problem. And I'm a big believer in that. Now, I'm guilty of just jumping in and doing it myself, but I have to retrain myself that you need to kind of stop, make sure that you're understanding what is it that you're trying to solve, and being more disciplined about that. I have customers today that reach out to me and say, Steve, I know the solution. I want you to build me a generative AI X. And I'm like, okay, why is it the first thing you're leading off with generative AI? Well, I don't know. I need to show that I'm getting involved in AI and stuff like that. And so, while I'd love to get in there and do an engagement, and I love working with AI, I want to make sure that I'm solving that person's needs first instead of jumping right into the solution. So while I don't want to like turn down business, I need to kind of back them up and kind of get them working on, okay, what is it that we're trying to solve? And maybe it could be visibility. Maybe they're like, look, I need to show that I'm doing some exciting stuff, or I'm using this technology, and really kind of solve that problem. Why is it that they feel that way? Or what is it that they're trying to solve, versus a lot of my customers saying, Steve, I need you to build me an AI, generative AI, not only AI, but generative AI, blank, and kind of backing them off. So I don't know, Jeremy, if you get the same thing on your end, that people just come to you and say, look, I know the solution. I just need you to go ahead and help me implement.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of my favorite, actually, we haven't talked about him, but I should give a shout out to my good friend, Philippe Barreau, who runs the Customer Innovation Lab at Michelin. And he has two sayings that come to mind right now. One, he said, most times the problem is the problem, which I really like. And the other is, that was my own. And what he means by that, I'm hearing an echo, by the way. But what he means by that is, he said that senior leaders will come with an idea, with their $1 billion Post-it. And he said their Customer Innovation Lab does a great job of providing data that shows this is not a $1 billion idea. We shouldn't invest in it, which the business appreciates. The business doesn't want to be deploying resources in the wrong direction. He said, so the leaders are thankful. He said, the problem is that was their only Post-it. That was the one idea. And now that it's been proven that it's actually not the idea, because they don't have a robust kind of flow, again, of ideas and a process for identifying problems and generating solutions, they're left kind of up the creek without a paddle. Because they go, that was my idea. And so one of the things that, I absolutely, Steve, I agree, is getting, I would say what you want to do is you want to decrease the friction to make contact with the market as much as possible. And people like to kind of stay in their heads and stay in their theories about what the market's going to love. And the truth is, the very best way is to deploy scrappy experiments and to develop mechanisms and systems to enable people to interface with the market in kind of low fidelity, fast, scrappy, cheap, affordable ways, right? If an experiment costs a lot of money, you don't do many experiments. If an experiment is affordable and fast, you can conduct a lot of experiments. And generally speaking, it's the team that can conduct the most experiments that wins. And that's you Steve, you mentioned Netflix earlier, but Mark Randolph's an innovation hero. And that's one of the things he says. It wasn't that we had a bunch of good ideas. It's that we developed a system for testing lots of bad ideas very quickly. And that's, so you can start to think about, how do you measure the speed at which you test ideas? How do you measure? And that's really where some of these systems and a capability mindset will really help, because then it's not about the innovation. It's about the innovators and the system that they live in.
Yeah. And I would shortcut, Lisa, if I can, I would shortcut, if it comes down to it and comes down to those innovations, is the person who can experiment the cheapest, fastest, most frictionless wins the game, because they're learning a lot faster than the rest. And that's one of the things that I learned very quickly under Jeremy. And let me tell you something. It's not that because he's on the call that I believe in Jeremy. I see
what you're doing. You're just buttering me up. I
am buttering you. I was in Texas. I was in Dallas, Texas. And actually I went to go see, I went to Fort Worth, and I'm there in Fort Worth, and all of a sudden I hear somebody call out my name, and it's Jeremy. It was I think it was like the day after Christmas or something like that, or Christmas Day. And I see Jeremy, and he's got his whole family there, and he's talking. And I think we had just finished another Zoom call or LinkedIn Live, and your daughter had broken the back window. You're using kind of that example. I don't know if you remember that. But the funny thing is, I told Jeremy, hey, I'm really loving your book. And Jeremy was like, oh, yeah? What about it? Do you love it? I kind of got the sense that he didn't believe me. But then he looked over but he looked over at my son, and my son had Jeremy's book in his hand.
It's true. He's like, dude, my dad's making me read this. You're that guy? I was like, I'm that guy.
And then his family didn't believe, like, somebody actually had bought his book, so they were giving him a hard time.
They're like, wait, that's the one you sold is to that guy? Did he just buy it from you? Are you carrying books? It was a very confusing situation.
Yeah. And so Jeremy, actually, it's just to show you what a small world it is. Jeremy kind of took the book and signed it for my son and stuff like that. But it was just kind of funny that was his homework over Christmas, and all of a sudden we kind of run in to Jeremy. But listen, if you want a secret, the secret is, if you can learn faster than the rest, if you can experiment faster than the rest, prone to action, that is the secret right there. And if you can do that better, you're actually going to be innovating much faster and more impactful.
All right, Jeremy, do you want to say something before? I really do want to get to this one last question, but we have about 6 minutes left. Do you have anything, Jeremy, to add?
Let's ask the AI question. How do we use it?
That's what I was going to ask. Interesting. So how do you see AI impacting the design thinking framework, and how design thinking is done today?
Well, it's tremendous. There's incredible opportunities. I've got some friends, actually heroes of Idea Flow, a couple of folks, Nick Thorne and Henrik Werdeland, who are entrepreneurs. They're founders of a company called Prehype, a venture accelerator, and they've basically codified a bunch of their methodology that they've used with entrepreneurs into an AI-driven platform. So you can go to Audos, AUDOS, and they've actually codified a lot of, you call it the design thinking. They don't call it design thinking, but where there's kind of synthetic focus groups and brainstorm partners and prototyping, and they'll instantaneously build a landing page and a pitch deck. And so for sure, that's a great example. I would encourage folks to check it out and try it. One other thing I would say is I've been conducting a little bit of research with a colleague from Singularity University. He's a future of work expert, Kian Gohar. And he and I have conducted a series of studies in organizations to see how does the availability of AI impact the team's ability to solve a problem. And we've done studies in both the US and in Europe. And it's been fascinating to see. Right now we're in conversations with HBR about publishing kind of part of the research. But the gist of it is, if you think about ideas or problem solving generally, there's two kind of key variables. One is volume, how many ideas you're generating, and two is variation, how broadly are you thinking. And despite the fact that, kind of theoretically speaking, AI can dramatically increase the volume and can dramatically increase the variation in teams thinking, yet despite that's kind of theoretical truth, yet practically speaking, teams that leverage AI generate fewer ideas and less diversity of ideas as well. And it's been fascinating to us to really dig into that and seek to understand. And what is our hypothesis is it's a phenomenon called satisficing that Herbert Simon won the Nobel Prize in 1956 for this. Basically, it's people settle for good enough. And what's happening with AI and teams that are left unchecked or that aren't aware of this bias, in 5 minutes, AI will give them a B+ answer. And we give them an hour to do a problem solving activity. Teams that don't have AI spend an hour solving the problem and they get a bunch of D's and a bunch of C's and a bunch of B's and a bunch of A's. Teams that use AI don't really have many D's, don't really have many C's, have a lot of B's and don't really have any A's. And it's because in 5 minutes they go, well, that's pretty good. Let's just you guys want to go get coffee? And they kind of, move on, right? And so it's interesting to see, and what Kian and I have been studying is how do we help teams become aware of their tendency to settle quickly? And then what are simple ways? We've got a model called Fix It. What are simple ways that they can short circuit that tendency to settle for a good enough idea when really even just a little bit more work can result in dramatically better outcomes? But it's all that to say, what's the impact of AI on, forget design thinking for a second, just on problem solving. It tends to accentuate underlying human biases if it's left unchecked. But if you're aware of just a few simple things, then it can dramatically amplify your possibility.
So Steve, any comments, any thoughts there that you want to add?
I mean, no, I listen. There's no secret that I've got Jeremy on here, and I definitely have learned a lot from him, and I appreciate, Jeremy, you joining us and sharing your great wisdom.
My pleasure. No, thanks for including me. I'm excited to be a part of the Horizon X journey as well.
I appreciate it. And so I'm excited to kind of be working with you on this. And I think for anybody on this call or anybody listening to this recording afterwards, if you're looking to truly implement innovation at scale, this is something that I'm very passionate about, that I've got a good team, as you can see around me, that can help out. And we want to have an impact. We want to bring new things to the world and be able to deliver on those. So if you have anything, please feel free to reach out to myself, reach out to Jeremy, get Jeremy's book, actually a very good book. I'm sure if he sees you somewhere, he won't be afraid to sign it for you. And this way we can do it. So thank you very much for your time, Jeremy. I don't know if you
Steve, I'm wondering, why don't I have a Horizon X email? I mean, come on. It's like, that's gotta fix that. Come on.
Done.
Love it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Lisa, thanks for getting up early. Well, actually, both of you, thanks for getting up early in the morning and asking us these questions.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. Jeremy, Steve, great chatting with you today. Really insightful. And everyone have a great rest of the day.
Likewise. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.